The human mind has a remarkable capacity for adaptation. Psychologists call it neuroplasticity. I call it learning how to feel nothing when feeling something is a liability. At this moment, my mother is thousands of miles away, in a country she fled to as a fugitive. Her voice, thin and distorted by the distance, is a viper's nest of curses, a mix of panicked Spanish and broken English. It's a sound that, for 18 years, would have sent ice-cold dread crawling up my spine. But tonight, sitting in this shelter, with everything I own fitting into a worn-out backpack at my feet, her rage is just noise, white noise, the final, pathetic echo of a monster who's lost its teeth. She has no power here, not anymore. I wait for her to take a breath, a brief pause in her tirade. "Do you remember?" I ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "How I used to make you that Lipton iced tea every day. The way you liked it with extra sugar." Her screaming stops. The silence on the line is heavy, confused. "I just wanted you to know I used to piss in it. Every single time." The screaming on the other end erupts, louder and more hysterical than before. I listen for a moment. Then my thumb moves across the screen. An abrupt click, and the line goes dead. But to understand how we got to that phone call, how a mother ended up a wanted felon, and how I ended up here, with nothing but the ghost of a stolen camera and a clean conscience, we have to go back. Back to the night she decided to laugh. My mother was a force of nature, a storm contained within a house. She was a big woman, strong, with a rage that was both unpredictable and absolute. Her love was a currency she used to buy compliance, and her anger was the punishment for failing to pay up. Every day was a tightrope walk over a canyon of her moods. If I walked too loud, I'd get my ass beat. If her own bedroom was dirty when I came home from school, she'd beat me for it. Logic was irrelevant. I learned early on that survival meant silence. On my 10th birthday, she brought home a cake. I saw the flecks of brown in the icing, and my throat began to tighten. Peanuts. She knew I was allergic, not fatally, but enough to make me sick. She feigned ignorance, a sweet smile plastered on her face as she told me to make a wish. I just looked at her. I didn't say a word. I just looked. That was my mistake. She called it the wrong way to look at her. The next thing I remember is the taste of blood in my mouth and a sharp, searing pain across my face. She broke my nose that day, for a cake I couldn't eat. She used whatever was at hand, fists, chairs, belts. The entire house was her arsenal, and I adapted. I stopped crying. I stopped pleading. Instead, I cultivated my own private rebellions, tiny, invisible acts of defiance that kept me from shattering. Peeing in her iced tea, rubbing her dinner fork between my butt cheeks before serving her plate. Small, disgusting acts that gave me back a sliver of the control she'd stolen. They were my secret, the only thing that was truly mine. My escape was supposed to be college. I clawed my way into a 2-year program, holding onto a 3.7 GPA like it was a life raft. The classroom was my sanctuary. The professor saw a quiet, dedicated student. They didn't see the boy who was just running as fast as he could from the storm back home. She'd promised me. She swore that as long as I was in college, I would always have a place to live. It was the most sophisticated trap she ever set. It was the end of my 2nd semester. Finals week. I came home late, around 10. I'd had a couple of beers to quiet the nerves. The moment I turned the key, the front door was yanked open. She stood there, her face a thundercloud of fury. "When are you moving out?" she screamed. I didn't have an answer. I didn't have $1 to my name. I knew that saying anything at all, would be like striking a match in a room full of gasoline. So I said nothing. I walked past her, my eyes fixed on the door to my room. I was 19 now, taller, stronger. I could have easily stood my ground. But I hate violence. And besides, you can't win a war against a hurricane. She followed me, ripping my bedroom door open, the yelling turning into a wall of sound. I just stood there and stared at her, my heart hammering against my ribs. I let her exhaust herself. Finally, she stopped, turned, and walked away. I heard her pick up the phone in the living room. Her voice changed instantly. It was no longer a roar, but a terrified, pathetic whimper. She was telling the police that she was scared for her life, that she thought her own son, the one who never raised his voice, was about to murder her and my younger siblings in their sleep. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, painting the victim as the monster. I packed a single duffel bag. In 5 minutes, my entire life was reduced to a few changes of clothes and a phone charger. I left my textbooks on the desk. I left my 3.7 GPA behind. As I walked out the front door and into the cold night, I saw the flashing blue and red lights sweeping across the front of the house. I didn't look back. I was finally out. I was also homeless. And I had just failed all of my finals. The storm had finally broken me. Or so she thought. The next 3 years were a blur of concrete and survival. When you have no safety net, a single mistake doesn't just set you back. It drops you off a cliff. I lived in the margins of the city, sleeping on friends' couches, in transit stations, sometimes on cardboard in alleys when the winter air was biting. I drank to stop the shivering, and then I drank to stop the thinking. But even in the dark, the human instinct is to find a light. For me, that light was a second-hand camera I bought with my first 3 paychecks from a grueling warehouse job. Looking through a viewfinder did something vital for my sanity. It put a layer of glass between me and the world. It allowed me to become a spectator in my own life, rather than a victim. I started to build something. I got a tiny, cheap apartment. I kept my head down. And then my younger sister found me online. She was old enough to have a phone now. Through her, I got a window back into the house I had fled. And soon after, an email arrived from my mother. It was written in all smiles and exclamation points, as if the last time we spoke she hadn't called the police to ruin my life. Psychologists speak of trauma bonding, the toxic, magnetic pull that makes an abused child constantly crave the validation of their abuser. I wanted so desperately to believe she had changed, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she missed her son. So, I dialed her number. The first few minutes were civil. She asked how I was doing, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. I decided to be honest. I told her I had been homeless. I told her I had struggled, starved, and nearly lost my mind after she kicked me out. And then she laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was a light, airy, utterly dismissive chuckle. "I never did a thing to you," she said, her voice dripping with mock pity. "You don't even know what real abuse is. It's your own damn fault you ended up on the street. So, how about your—" I didn't let her finish. I hung up the phone, and I sat there in the silence of my room. The color had drained from my face, but my hands weren't shaking. It is a dangerous thing to deny a victim their reality. In that single, condescending laugh, she had erased years of my suffering. She had made a mockery of my broken nose, the bruises, and the freezing nights I spent sleeping in public parks. I felt a cold, absolute clarity wash over me. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot, it burns itself out. This was ice. This was calculation. I realized then that she would never face her demons willingly. So, I would have to bring them to her doorstep. There were a few things my mother had forgotten. When she first bought a computer and got a smartphone, she was entirely illiterate in technology. I was the one who set up her emails. I was the one who created her cloud storage accounts. And in her arrogance, she had never changed those passwords. I still had the keys to her entire digital existence. But my most powerful weapon was a folder I had been building since I was 13 years old. Every single time she struck me, every purple welt from an extension cord, every split lip, every drop of blood, I had photographed it. I had hidden those digital files on a secure drive. And now, my little sister had been secretly sending me photos of her own bruises. I stared at the screen, watching years of torment compile into a single, devastating dossier. I looked at the glowing blue upload bar. The trap was set. She had laughed at my pain. Now, it was time to see if she would laugh at the consequences. If you want to dismantle a fortress, you don't attack the stone walls. You cut off the water supply. You stop the incoming grain. You quietly, methodically, remove the pillars holding up the roof until the entire structure collapses under its own weight. I started with CPS. I didn't just write a vague, emotional complaint. I presented a case with the clinical precision of a prosecuting attorney. I compiled the digital vault, years of time-stamped photos of my own injuries, the recent photos my younger sister had sent me, the historical police dispatch logs from the nights the cops had been called to our house, and the court records of my oldest sister's custody case from before I was even born. I laid out a timeline of 20 years of continuous, documented abuse. The universe, it seems, occasionally enjoys a bit of poetic justice. When the social workers and the police arrived at her door the very next day, they didn't just find a quiet house. They walked in while she was mid-tantrum, physically assaulting my younger sister. In a matter of minutes, her authority was stripped. An emergency removal order was executed. My siblings were escorted out of the house, and she was led away in handcuffs. The first pillar had fallen. But a cornered beast is still dangerous. To ensure she couldn't hire a high-priced attorney to fight the state, I had to cut off her funding. My mother was making $75,000 a year at a highly specialized job, a position she had secured entirely on a web of lies. She had never actually earned the college degree listed on her resume. I drafted a polite, formal email to her company's human resources department, questioning her credentials and attaching a certified response from the university registrar, proving she had never graduated. It triggered an immediate internal background audit. Days later, she was summarily fired and blacklisted from the only industry she knew. Just like that, her financial lifeline was gone. Next, I went to work on her daily infrastructure. Because she had been digitally illiterate when she bought her first computer, I had registered her primary email addresses and cloud storage accounts under my own name. I logged into the master dashboard, clicked through the administrative settings, and permanently deactivated every single service. Her digital footprint vanished. The portals she used to manage her mortgage, her utilities, and her bills were locked forever, with no easy way to recover them. Finally, I made a call to the Internal Revenue Service. For years, I had watched her commit blatant tax fraud, claiming other people's children on her returns to secure massive write-offs. I knew the names, the dates, and the exact methods she used. I handed all of it over to an IRS auditor. I knew about the fallout in real time. My mother's best friend was a notorious gossip who told her son everything, and that son happened to be one of my oldest friends. Every day he gave me the play-by-play. She was screaming in an empty house, staring at blank screens, facing felony charges, and trying to figure out how to pay a mortgage with zero income. the absolute beauty of it. She had no idea I was the one pulling the strings. She thought the world was just finally, inexplicably collapsing on top of her. And in a way, it was. The law eventually caught up with her. But before the handcuffs could click shut on a permanent sentence, she fled. The state had filed formal felony charges against her. Rather than face the music, she packed her bags and left the country, returning to South America under the guise of a temporary vacation with family friends. That brings us back to the phone call. The call where she had the audacity to demand I go to her caseworkers and lie. To tell them that she was a perfect mother, that she had never raised a hand to me, so she could get her tax write-offs and her custody back. When I hung up on her screaming, I didn't feel a rush of adrenaline. I didn't feel a sudden burst of joy. I just felt quiet. I set the phone face down on the metal frame of my bunk bed, and for the first time in my life, my hands were entirely steady. That phone call was the last day I took a drink. It's been months now. I had spent years using alcohol to drown out the echoes of her voice, but hearing her unravel across an ocean made me realize that her voice didn't have any weight anymore. It was just hot air. My younger siblings are still in the care of the state. They are housed together, safe and away from her reach. Her former fiancé, the father of the youngest, has filed for full custody. Her house is going into foreclosure. The life she built on lies, abuse, and manipulation has disintegrated into ash. There were no winners in this. My revenge didn't mend my broken nose, nor did it give me back the childhood I spent hiding under beds, but it kept my siblings from suffering the same fate. And that is enough. As for me, I am still rebuilding. Shortly after that phone call, my camera, the only thing that gave me a sense of purpose, was stolen. It felt like a cruel joke from the universe, a test to see if I would spiral back into the bottle. I didn't. I swallowed my pride and moved into a transitional shelter specifically designed for people with jobs and savings. I work hard every day. I save every penny. I am learning to exist without the constant, suffocating weight of my past. Psychologists talk about apathy as a symptom of trauma, the inability to feel joy, sorrow, or connection. I'll be honest. I still don't feel much of anything most of the time. My emotional spectrum was burned out when I was a child. I wish I knew how to love people the way normal, happy families do. I wish I had a mother I could call when things get hard. But wishing is a luxury for people who didn't have to fight to survive. I don't know what my next chapter looks like, but for the first time in 21 years, I am actually curious to see what I am capable of if I give myself a chance. The storm has passed. The air is cold, but it is clean. And finally, I can breathe. But while my battle was a lifetime in the making, some wars are fought on a much smaller, dirtier patch of land. And sometimes, the most devastating, satisfying justice doesn't involve courts, police, or state agencies. Just a handful of wild, unyielding seeds and a neighbor who cared a little too much about his grass. If you want to find out how a quiet, law-abiding man pushed his insufferably arrogant, retired accountant neighbor to the absolute brink of madness, leaving him on his hands and knees in a freezing midnight downpour, frantically clawing at his own lawn with a rusted garden trowel, click on the video on your screen right now. I'll see you there.